The old Victorian mansion stood silhouetted against the stormy sky, rain lashing against its decaying facade. Inside, Emily huddled closer to her fiancé, Mark, a shiver running down her spine despite the roaring fire in the hearth. They were house-sitting for Mark's eccentric aunt, a renowned collector of peculiar artifacts. Aunt Mildred had warned them about the house, its quirks, she'd called them, with a wink and a cryptic smile. Now, Emily wasn't so sure she found the quirks charming. The unsettling feeling had started subtly. A faint whisper in the empty hallways, the feeling of being watched from the shadows. Then, the music box in the attic began playing on its own, a melancholic tune that seemed to seep into their bones. Mark, ever the pragmatist, dismissed it as drafts and old house noises. But Emily couldn't shake the growing unease. That night the storm intensified, the wind howling like a banshee, rattling the windows in their frames. A loud crash from downstairs jolted them awake. Mark, grabbing a heavy poker from beside the fireplace, cautiously made his way down the creaking stairs. Emily waited, her heart pounding in her chest, clutching a small antique doll, the only thing in the room that seemed to offer a strange sort of comfort. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Just when Emily's fear reached a fever pitch, Mark reappeared, his face pale, his eyes wide with an uncharacteristic fear. "It was nothing," he stammered, his voice strained. "Just a branch against the window." But Emily noticed he hadn't put the poker back. He kept it clutched tightly in his hand. The rest of the night passed in a blur of nervous whispers and fitful sleep. As dawn broke, the storm finally subsided, and an eerie calm settled over the house. Emily and Mark descended the stairs, hand in hand, to survey the supposed damage. The window was indeed broken, a jagged hole in the glass where the branch had supposedly hit. But lying on the floor, amidst the shattered glass, was not a branch. It was a small, intricately carved wooden hand, identical to the one clutched by the antique doll Emily had held throughout the night. And the doll in her room? Its hand was now gone. They stood frozen, staring at the hand on the floor, a silent question hanging in the air. What had they disturbed in Aunt Mildred's house? And what would it do next? The chilling discovery of the wooden hand cemented the unsettling reality. They weren't alone in Aunt Mildred's house. The escaped prisoner, a violent offender, was still at large, and now, added to that terror, was the chilling presence within the house. Mark and Emily were trapped, their car keys inexplicably missing, presumably taken by Aunt Mildred in her haste. With the phone lines dead, their only connection to the outside world was severed. The silence that followed the storm was more unnerving than the wind's howl. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside the broken window, sent jolts of fear through them. They tried to rationalize the hand, blaming the wind, a stray animal, anything but the creeping dread that whispered in the back of their minds. As the day wore on, the whispers grew louder, no longer faint and ethereal but closer, more insistent. They sounded like someone rummaging, searching, hungry. Grunts and groans echoed from the depths of the house, guttural sounds that seemed to claw their way up from the basement. Mark tried the basement door, but it was locked, the key nowhere to be found. Emily, drawn by an inexplicable pull, wandered back to the attic. The music box sat silent, but the air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. A faint, sweet smell hung in the air, like decaying flowers. She noticed a loose floorboard near the corner, and as she knelt down, she heard a scratching sound from beneath. Hesitantly, she pried the board loose, revealing a small, dusty space beneath. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed letters and faded photographs, was a leather-bound diary. Before she could open it, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, followed by Mark's terrified yell. Emily scrambled down the attic stairs, the diary clutched tightly in her hand, her heart pounding against her ribs. She found Mark in the living room, staring at the shattered remains of a framed portrait of Aunt Mildred. But it wasn't the broken glass that held his attention. It was the portrait itself. Where Aunt Mildred's face had been, there was now only a smooth blank canvas, as if her image had been erased. And beneath the empty frame, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, was a single word. Soon. The single, chilling word soon hung in the air like a tangible threat. Emily's breath hitched in her throat, the antique diary suddenly feeling like a lead weight in her hands. Mark, his face ashen, pointed a trembling finger towards the fireplace. Resting against the soot-stained bricks, where the poker had been only moments before, was a single, withered rose, its petals the same unsettling shade as the writing on the wall. Driven by a primal need to escape, Mark raced to the front door, throwing his weight against it, but it remained stubbornly locked. He rattled the handle, a desperate plea in his eyes, but the heavy oak door wouldn't budge. The windows, sealed shut for decades, offered no escape either. They were trapped, boxed in with an unseen entity and the promise of something terrible yet to come. Suddenly, the groaning and grunting from the basement intensified, closer now, accompanied by the distinct sound of heavy footsteps ascending the wooden stairs. Mark grabbed a shattered piece of the portrait frame, wielding it like a makeshift weapon. Emily clutched the diary to her chest, its worn leather offering a strange, cold comfort. As the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, the temperature in the room plummeted, a chilling wave of air washing over them, carrying the scent of decay and dust. A dark shadow stretched across the floor, reaching towards them like a grasping hand. They huddled together, backs against the wall, their eyes fixed on the hallway, waiting for whatever horror was about to emerge from the darkness. And then, just as the shadow reached the edge of the living room, a key turned in the lock of the front door. It swung open, revealing the silhouette of Aunt Mildred, her face obscured by the shadows of the doorway, a strange, almost predatory smile playing on her lips. "Oh, you're still here," she said, her voice a low, melodic purr. "I do hope you've been behaving yourselves." And in her hand, Emily saw a glint of metal, a small, ornate key. The key to the basement. The chilling normalcy of Aunt Mildred's greeting sent a shiver down Emily's spine that was colder than any ghostly presence. Mark, still clutching the broken frame, lowered it slightly, but his eyes remained fixed on his aunt, suspicion and dawning horror battling within them. "Aunt Mildred," he began, his voice strained. "Where have you been? Strange things have been happening." Aunt Mildred simply chuckled, a low, throaty sound that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. "Strange things? Oh, Mark, you always had such an active imagination." She stepped fully into the light, and the unsettling smile widened, revealing a glint of something dark in her eyes. The basement key, still clutched in her hand, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. "The phone lines are down. The car is gone," Emily added, her voice trembling slightly. "We've been worried sick." Aunt Mildred's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something akin to annoyance crossing her face, before being replaced by the same unsettling calm. "Oh, the car. Silly me, I must have forgotten to tell you. I lent it to a friend." Mark's eyes narrowed. "A friend? In the middle of the night? During a storm?" He took a step closer, his voice hardening. "Aunt Mildred, what's going on?" Aunt Mildred sighed, a theatrical gesture that seemed to mock their concern. "Very well," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I suppose I can't keep it from you any longer." She glanced towards the basement door, the key dangling from her finger. "My friend is in need of some assistance. He's had a bit of trouble with the law, you see." Emily's blood ran cold. "Trouble with the law?" she repeated, the pieces clicking into place. The escaped prisoner, the locked basement, Aunt Mildred's strange behavior. "He's family, actually," Aunt Mildred continued, her smile returning, sharper now, almost cruel. "My brother, and," she added, her gaze settling on Mark, "your father." The basement key, glinting in the dim light, seemed to mock them with its silent promise of revelation. The groaning sounds from below intensified, a guttural reminder of the presence hidden in the depths of the house. Aunt Mildred's smile widened. "He's been unwell for quite some time." A wave of nausea washed over Mark. His father, a man he'd believed long dead, was not only alive but hiding in his aunt's basement, a fugitive from the law. The whispers, the groans, the strange occurrences. They weren't ghosts. They were the sounds of a desperate, possibly deranged man. He looked at Emily, her face mirroring his own shock and horror, and then back at Aunt Mildred, his aunt, who now seemed like a stranger, a dangerous conspirator in this terrifying charade. "He needs our help," Aunt Mildred continued, her voice laced with a disturbingly sweet undertone. He's been through so much. And after all, she added, her eyes gleaming, family takes care of family, doesn't it? Mark felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. Help! He spat, the word dripping with disbelief. You helped him escape! You've been harboring a fugitive! This is insane! Aunt Mildred's smile vanished, replaced by a chilling coldness. He didn't escape, she corrected, her voice sharp. I freed him. They locked him away, those monsters, for something he didn't do. Her grip tightened on the basement key. And now, we're going to make them pay. The groaning from the basement escalated into a guttural roar, shaking the very foundation of the house. Emily took a step back, pulling Mark with her. The air grew thick with a metallic scent, and the temperature dropped again, the cold seeping into their bones. He's getting impatient, Aunt Mildred murmured, her eyes fixed on the basement door. He wants to see you, Mark. He wants to meet his family. She took a step towards the door, the key held aloft. Just as she reached for the doorknob, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by a series of frantic footsteps. Aunt Mildred froze, her head snapping upwards, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until a figure burst through the doorway at the top of the stairs. It was a man, wild-eyed and disheveled, his clothes torn and dirty. He stared at them, his chest heaving. And then, in a voice raspy with desperation, he spoke. Mildred, he croaked, his eyes locking onto Aunt Mildred. They're here. They've found me. The revelation that the man at the top of the stairs was Mark's father, the escaped murderer, sent a fresh wave of terror through them. Mark recoiled, every cell in his body screaming in protest at the sight of the man who was supposed to be dead, the man who represented everything monstrous and depraved. Emily, her mind flashing back to the horrific night of the assault, felt a cold dread grip her heart. This man, this monster, was family.